again, what interests me is exactly this problem. That is to say, nirvana as the only absolute reality, which is not reality, and so on and so on. But how is it possible that within this totally dispersed primordial void of nirvana, a false appearance emerged? How is it possible that we got caught into what Buddhist calls samsara, this wheel of life, of passions which enslave you, and so on and so on? This question points towards an act that, precisely in the quantum sense maybe, breaks the symmetry within nirvana itself, and thus makes appear something out of nothing. And Freud's answer for this is precisely Todestrieb. Now I want to be here very precise. What Freud calls Todestrieb is not, as it may appear, the Buddhist wheel of life. You know this Buddhist idea, we are caught in this false desire, always non-satisfied striving. So the idea is when you achieve nirvana, you are at complete peace. Of course, I'm not vulgarizing here Buddhism. It's not that you are in another spiritual reality. All radical Buddhists know the reality is exactly the same. Everything is the same. You are just no longer phenomenologically caught in this wheel of desire and so on. So I think that the point of Freud is not, no, we cannot get out, we are forever caught into the wheel of craving which makes us non-satisfied and so on. Drive, on the contrary, is a kind of a Freudian, you know what Galileo allegedly said after he was forced to confirm that Earth doesn't move, eppur si muove. The Freudian ontological wager, vete, or thesis, hypothesis, is that even when you go through fantasy, all the illusions and so on, you are not in nirvana. Something still moves. Eppur si muove. There is, even at that level, still a movement. Here, to make this clear, another surprising analogy with hard sciences can be of some help. The paradox of Freudian drive is, I think, perfectly rendered in the hypothesis of so-called Higgs field, widely discussed in contemporary particle physics. It is rendered, if I understand correctly, Higgs field. I have some problems here, I'm not saying I do. What's the idea? The idea, if I got it correctly, is the following one. Left to their own devices in an environment to which they can pass their energy, all physical systems will eventually assume a state of lowest energy. You know, like if you leave a system to itself, slowly it spends energy, it achieves a sense of minimum. So, to put it in another way, the more mass we take from a system, the more we lower its energy, till we reach the vacuum state at which the energy is zero. There are, however, phenomena which compel us to posit the hypothesis that there has to be something, some substance, that we cannot take away from a given system without raising the system's energy. And this something is called the Higgs field. Once this field appears in a vessel that has been pumped empty and whose temperature has been lowered as much as possible, its temperature will be further lowered. The something which thus appears is a something which contains less energy than nothing, a something that is characterized by an overall negative energy. You see, that's the paradox, that zero is not the lowest. It's not you take, there is something which is even less than zero. That's the Higgs field. And I think this is what Lacan aims at when he emphasizes the difference between Freud's Todestrieb and the so-called nirvana principle, according to which every life system tends towards the lowest level of tension, ultimately towards death. Nothingness, the void, being deprived of all substance, and the lowest level of energy, paradoxically, no longer coincide. It's cheaper. It costs the system less energy. It's cheaper, as it were, to persist in something than to dwell in nothing. At the lowest level of tension, or in the void, in the dissolution of all order. And it is this distance that sustains the death drive. Far from being the same as the nirvana principle. The death drive is precisely that less than nothing. Something that, how to put it, costs energetically even less than nothing. This also gives, I think, gives another nice answer, how we should answer the standard philosophical critique of Freudian trieb, which is that, but isn't Freudian trieb, drive, basically just another version of the post-Hegelian will, first developed by late Schelling and Schopenhauer and then in Nietzsche. Is, however, the Freudian drive really another name for Wille, for the will? A reference to the history of music may be of some help here. It was Schopenhauer who claimed that music brings us in contact with the Ding an sich, the nominal. It renders directly the drive of the life substance that words can only signify. You know, Schopenhauer in history claims that words refer only to Vorstellungen, while in music you get directly the taste of the nominal life substance beneath phenomena. For that reason, music seizes the subject in the real of his or her being, bypassing the detour of meaning. In music, we hear what we cannot see, the vibrating life force beneath the flow of Vorstellungen. But, what but? Let me begin with one scene from a film. Recall the nice scene from the beginning of Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America, in which we see a phone ringing loudly, and when a hand picks up the receiver, the ringing goes on. It's a very mysterious effect. Okay, it's later explained, but the mysterious effect remains. It is as if the musical life force of the sound is too strong to be contained by reality. It persists beyond its limitation. There is incidentally a similar nice scene in David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. You remember, a singer sings Roy Orbison's crying, she collapses, the song goes on. Of course, later we learn it was a playback and so on. But there is for a moment, brief moment, this confusion, you know, as if the source of voice disappears, the singing goes on. But this would be the excess of life. This is still Schopenhauerian domain. But what happens when this flux of life substance itself is suspended? I want to evoke another. Here we have pure life. When you hear the ringing without visual counterpart or singing without, here we have this pure life substance energy. But what happens when we have the opposite phenomenon? Like I saw years ago, it deeply impressed me, ballet staged by Georges Balanchine, based on a short orchestral piece by Anton Webern. They are all short, okay. So that after the music was over, some 5 minutes of music, the dancers continued to dance for some time in complete silence, as if they did not notice that music that provided the substance for their dance is already over. You know, it's like the cat in cartoons, Tom and Jerry, who simply continues to walk even when there is no ground. Like, it goes magically on. I think this is something, this would be the representation of drive. It's not Wille. It's not the sound which goes on, when you even have no representation to accompany, would be pure Wille, pure light energy. But the pure drive, as Todestrieb, would have been precisely these dancers which go on dancing without music. But it still goes on, it is still moving. So I claim that even in these terms, drive is a persistence which goes on even when the will disappears or is suspended. I think that phenomenologically, again, it's wrong to read Freud's Todestrieb as another expression of Wille. Todestrieb is precisely something which remains when you suspend the will. Which is why Todestrieb is not active, is much more strangely active-passive, how should I put it, ambiguous. It's a kind of a passivity of a pur si muove, it still goes on, and which is why, incidentally, again, the question that interests me in Buddhism is, to put it in popular culture terms, is the question that unfortunately Star Wars fails to answer. It's, you know, as all normal people, although they are not such great villains, I craved to see that the third part, which was the last one to be shot, where you finally learn how evil emerged, how did Anakin Skywalker become Darth Vader. And the film fails there, of course, miserably. But that's, you know, but nonetheless there is one useful notion that you find in the film. This idea of a, as they put it, a disturbance in the field of force, no? That is to say, the idea is, to put it in Buddhist terms, we don't, and there are some mysterious, I know, passages in some of Tibetan Buddhist stuff which point in this direction, that, how should I put it, it's not simply, we have nirvana and then samsara, the field of false passions, appearances. Something can go terribly wrong already at the level of nirvana itself, up there. There is something wrong up there, some pathological disturbance, which is not yet, we are caught in desire, in false craving, and that would be drive, I think. Drive is this, the very nirvana, spiritual enlightenment, getting wrong. And this is why I think that the basic retooling, this is my dream, to shoot a new version of Star Wars, where precisely the bad guys would be rehabilitated. And even, I am even tempted to put it in Marxist terms, like, why should they be bad? I'm like a French Jacobin revolutionary, and I would say the Emperor and Darth Vader are a kind of a little bit authoritarian, okay, but a kind of authoritarian, democratic, egalitarian, centralized things. And who are these stupid Jedi? Some corrupted old feudals and so on and so on. It's kind of a, you know, like French Revolution. It's like Robespierre crashing Vendée and all that shit there and so on, no? I would love to do this different version of this, no? So, okay, getting to my makeup.